Well, welcome back, everybody. It's great to see you. I guess one great thing about Zoom is we can have our panelists joining us from so many different locations. And Michael Harrison is there in Nantucket, and George is in Key West, Florida. And to give you a little background on where we're going to go with this panel, Tony Sarg, his wife Bertha, and their daughter Mary began visiting Nantucket in 1920, and they quickly became a part of the island's summer scene. Sarg participated avidly in the island's just emerging art colony, and its landmarks, history, and folklore found their way into the art and commercial designs that were sold in his store. My great pleasure to introduce you to these two individuals who kindly served as expert advisors and catalog authors to Tony Sarg Genius at Play, and whose personal and institutional collections are prominently featured. They were incredibly knowledgeable and helpful, and it's very exciting to say that the exhibition, following its close here at the Norman Rockwell Museum on November 5th, will be going to the Nantucket Historical Association for next summer's season. So Mike will be able to say a little bit more about that. My co-curator, Lenore D. Miller, who's curator at Merita of the George Washington University Museums, is also joining us as a moderator this morning. And it's my pleasure to tell you a little bit more about our speakers. Michael R. Harrison is Chief Curator and Obed Macy Research Chair at the Nantucket Historical Association. He has held curatorial positions at the National Building Museum, the Smithsonian's National Museum of American History, and the Riverside Museum in Glasgow, Scotland. He is the author of Collecting Nantucket, Artifacts from an Island Community, the co-author of Glasgow Museum's The Ship Models, A History and Complete Illustrated Catalog, and he's written nearly 70 historical reports on maritime, architectural, and engineering topics for U.S. National Park Service's Heritage Documentation Program. So welcome, Michael. George Korn has worked with the Norman Rockwell Museum as exhibition advisor, and he is the founder of Forager House Collection, an art and antiques gallery on Nantucket, which he has owned and operated for 20 years. He worked as assistant and acting director of the New Jersey State Council on the Arts, and he's curated exhibitions for the New Jersey State Museum and Key West Art and Historical Society. As an author, he's written many articles for Arts and Antiques, the Trenton Times, Historic Nantucket, and the Inquirer and Mirror. And he is co-author of the Trenton Battle Monument, Aiken's Bronzes, Richard Kemble, a retrospective, and Tony Sarg, the Forager House Collection. Warm welcome to both of you. We are thrilled to see you and happy to have you.
Thank you.
So I think, Michael, are you planning to start maybe by bringing up some of the amazing images from the NHA's collection? And we are so looking forward to having you share, also background on how they were acquired, because the exhibition that we have on view has exceptional examples of Sarg's work from the NHA collection and from George's own collection as well.
Yes, no, I'm happy to share some things and tell some stories, and give us a bit of a quick overview of sort of the different aspects of Sarg's life with Nantucket and some of the ways that Nantucket influenced his commercial work and his life in general. Here we have a photograph of him out in the moors sketching with the water beyond. As you mentioned, he and his family started coming here in 1920. We think they were introduced to the island by Austin Strong, the New York playwright, who was a friend of his, and they certainly became better friends through their association with Nantucket. And they came here, like many people do, in order to relax and have a summer away and to enjoy the sort of empty and open spaces of the island and the historic and quaint architecture of the island. And he certainly did that. He got out many days, would carry his portable painting kit with him or a sketch pad and go explore the island. And let me get this to advance. There we go. And we have in our collection here on Nantucket a number of pieces that reflect simply his enjoyment of the island, going and painting. He's so well known for his commercial illustration and his caricature and, these sort of, if you will, off the wall designs, but he really was an accomplished artist. As demonstrated by these two paintings, the watercolor is a commercial catboat tied up in the harbor here on Nantucket. We know of at least two scenes that he painted in watercolor of this boat in this location. This is from 1922, not long after, only the first few years that he was here. And then the Bonton Fish Market, quaint little shack owned by a local fisherman who sold fish here for a few years, who had decorated the building with salvaged pieces from shipwrecks and salvaged marine parts. So again, another, really, really accomplished piece looking at the local scene. It wasn't long before people realized who he was and asked him if he would do commissions for them here on Nantucket. The Skipper Restaurant was a disused schooner that was moored in the harbor and turned into a sort of tea house in the early 20s. And he did a bunch of murals for the owners. We don't know a whole lot about the entire decorative scheme, but this does survive. This is the men's room door from the Skipper Restaurant. Inside and outside. The outside has this crusty fisherman with his oversized catch. And then the interior is this nearly inexplicable scene of an elephant and a teacup dancing down the beach. And the teacup or bowl is holding a meat cleaver in its hand and smiling broadly. Don't know what that was about. I've always wanted to see what the women's restroom door had on the inside, but we don't know. Here's a great little thing. He, as I said, he and his wife and his daughter were here, and their little dog Freckles. They bought a house in 1923, a historic house here on island, and he started writing children's books and illustrating children's books. And his first three of these, published in the early 20s, all feature Nantucket. The Tony Sarg's book for children age 6 to 60, the first of these, of which we have many of the original design sketches and page layouts, as well as copies of the published book, features two or three adventures, well, three adventures with Mary and Freckles getting into misadventures on Nantucket. It introduces the island, as you can see here. These are actual buildings, in town, and he refers to the whaling history here. He has scenes set in his own house. They're really quite something. But the island milieu gets into his work very quickly. And this is just, one of the most obvious examples of that. He also just embraced the local community, and the local community embraced him. He was very popular, was very well known. He took part in a lot of charity work here. Early on in the 1920s, he brought his entire puppetry troupe, and they did charitable performances for the benefit of the island's hospital. Later, he did additional charity work for the hospital's annual summer fundraisers, which sometimes took the form of a fete, a sort of party, street party. Other times, the waterfront carnival was one of their fundraisers. So he would design their programs. He would do posters for them. This is a picture in the center here is him doing lightning caricatures, lightning sketches of people, for modest amounts of money that were given to charity. Another example, he would design the posters for these things. The center drawing, this is this aerial view of Main Street. His daughter actually dressed up in historic costume and sold copies of this on Main Street to raise money for the hospital as part of the whole hospital fundraising week. And then the poster from 1935 with the island scenes and referring to the whaling history. And then in 1940, they didn't hold a big party, but they did have a fundraising period. And this was his, call to action poster for them. Again, his daughter and his dog portrayed in front of one of the historic houses on Main Street. His wife, Bertha, decided that she wanted to have some stuff to do when she was here. And it was her idea to set up a shop, a novelty shop, selling souvenirs and candy and other goods. Tony Sarg was deeply involved in the design of these stores and designing the products and making the products. And in fact, they were very quickly branded as the Tony Sarg shop. Well, the very first Tony Sarg shop is the picture in the upper left here. This was actually called the Green Umbrella and was a small rental shack that they got here in town that they set up. They didn't get their lease renewed on that space, so they moved to a different space, which is shown. The show window of it is in the bottom picture with the three boys. They are looking into the shop from outside at all of the little figurines that Sarg came up with to sell. And then in the early 30s, about 1933, they rented a shop on Steamboat Wharf right near where most of the tourists arrived. And they set up this Tony Sarg shop that you see in the big picture on the right. And these are the progenitors then for the Tony Sarg shop set up in other towns, New Hope and Marblehead and elsewhere, run by his wife, run eventually by his daughter, with his heavy participation. And this led him to commercial designs. And he was already doing product design more generally, but he started doing product design that included Nantucket for sale in his shops. So here we have a whaling scene inspired by Nantucket's history. We have the port scene at the bottom, also inspired by Nantucket, but equally applicable to other places. These inexpensive ceramics with the whale and the Nantucket outline are just, some of many, many examples of the kinds of bandboxes and paper and, sort of all kinds of just constantly churning out a creative deluge of these kind of products for sale here and elsewhere. And then these are fabric designs that include Nantucket. I mean, he did a lot of wallpapers and fabric designs inspired by the American South or by the colonial period and the Revolution. But these are two that are firmly grounded on Nantucket. The one on the right being the most obvious with the word Nantucket worked into it and the island's outline, and then the light ship that you would sail past on your way here. And that is not actually George Washington in the center of the orange field. That's Admiral Coffin of Nantucket history. The other one, less obviously Nantucket to people who haven't been here because it doesn't say Nantucket, but these are all Nantucket scenes with the Unitarian Church, the old mill, a representative trading vessel, and the yellow and orange sailed catboats, very characteristic of here. And then it's not just products wholly about Nantucket, but Nantucket iconography works its way into his other designs. And so here we have a detail from a sample sheet with many of his sort of colonial-inspired, Pennsylvania Dutch-inspired designs with the sort of toy soldier-esque figures. But worked in amidst all of this, we again have the whaling scene at the bottom left. We have Sankaty Head Lighthouse from Nantucket in the middle row on the right. So very much interpenetrating his creative mind, is Nantucket throughout the 1920s and 1930s. The item on the right is a design for a shower curtain. Unfortunately, never realized, but it is, again, Nantucket scenes, the Nantucket Unitarian Church there with the rainbow, the summertime bathers facing the shark at the bottom. Really great and creative piece inspired, we can presume, by his time here in the sun and sand on island. And then perhaps a piece de resistance of his participation with Nantucket, this historical map. This is one of 3 historical maps he drew of Nantucket. He, of course, drew historical maps of other places as well. There's one of New Hope. There are various maps associated with New York. But this is a snapshot of Nantucket in 1926, with, sort of where you'd go to do various summertime things on the island. And then the icons around the edge are either sites that you can go see or historic people you should be aware of in order to make your experience here more vivid. Now, it may seem to people, the Nantucket Historical Association has an enormous Tony Sarg collection. Based on these brief comments, I hope it'll be obvious that there is a legitimate connection between Nantucket and him. But it isn't necessarily obvious that all this stuff should have ended up here. His daughter maintained connections to Nantucket throughout her life, even though she didn't live here later in life. And when she inherited, of course, a lot of things from her father. When she came to divest herself of that material, she considered selling it through the island's thrift shop. And the thrift shop here is run by the Cottage Hospital, the same hospital that Tony Sarg participated in fundraisers for. So she logically thought it would be a good place to sell Tony Sarg items from her collection. And local businessman and resident Philip Murray stepped in, bought the entire lot from her, and pardon me, and donated it to the Historical Association. And it is the core of our Tony Sarg materials that covers his sketches from his early childhood, its designs and perspective books for experimental cinema, it's maps like this, it's some of the products that you've seen. And it has then sparked donations over the years from a wide variety of families and private collectors, including George Korn, who has very generously made numerous donations to the collection over time, and other places, so that we have an extremely fine collection reflecting all phases of his career, very strong about Nantucket, but certainly not solely focused on Nantucket, as demonstrated by some of these things. And George, I'm going to turn it over to you now to make the comments that you wanted to make, and perhaps to tell us about one of the most famous incidents of Sarg's summer life.
Well, can we go back to the map that we were just
Absolutely.
looking at? When I first came to Nantucket in the 1960s to visit some friends, excuse me, I remember reading Moby Dick in prep school. And I went back and I looked at it, and I think the quote from chapter 14th is worth reading. Herman Melville wrote in 1851, Nantucket, take out your map and look at it. See what a real corner of the world it occupies, how it stands there, away offshore, more lonely than the Eddystone Lighthouse. Look at it, a mere hillock, an elbow of sand, all beach without a background. Well, he wrote that in 1851. But perhaps we should look back before Melville wrote about Nantucket, which helped put Nantucket on the map. Nantucket was also very much involved with trading with the world. Between 1843 and 1855, Macy's established stores in California, Wisconsin, and Macy's as we know it in New York City. Macy started his store in Nantucket, and look where it has come. The star in Macy's logo was the star from the Macy's tattoo when he was for a short time as a whaler. The Folger family in Nantucket established a coffee company, which is still in existence and has a presence worldwide. The Starbuck family in New York was another Nantucket family that was known and worldwide, and the Starbucks Coffee Company as we know it today borrowed that name because Starbuck was the first mate on the Pico, which was the ship in Moby Dick, and he played a main character. So here we have three Nantucket families that established companies that are still going on worldwide. After the Civil War, Nantucket became a tourist attraction. Frank Leslie's Illustrated Weekly magazine had wonderful illustrations of the tourist life in Nantucket in August of 1872. And as Michael has already said, Tony came to Nantucket in 1920. And now can we look at the envelopes, please? He wrote to his daughter, Mary, letters, and these envelopes survive. I like to point out the top one has an address, Miss Mary Sarg, North Liberty Street, Nantucket, Mass. It got there without any problem. But look at the illustrations that he put on that envelope. The elephant, the boy with the balloons, the monkeys, the whale, the fisherman, Freckles, the dog, chasing the cat at the bottom. But The second envelope is, I think, amazing. To Miss Who, Nantucket, Mass. It says opened by mistake. Well, here, the Postal Service somehow got this, and Nantucket, being a small community, figured out this was Sarg and delivered it to North Liberty Street.
Hmm.
I think it's amazing.
It is pretty. If I can break in for just half a second, he was perhaps relying on the postman to recognize the house, which is literally their house, which says
Right.
47, the original street numbering. It's pretty remarkable.
Yeah, I just think these two envelopes are remarkable. Next slide, please. Nantucket, as Michael said, Austin Strong was an acquaintance and friend of Sarg, and he came shortly after in the 1920s and also bought a house. And Austin Strong was a very prominent personage. He was a stage designer, theatrical producer, a leading figure on the Summertime in Nantucket, produced the Hospital Fete, the Waterfront Carnival of 1929, captain of the Yacht Club, and so much more. What we see here is Austin Strong in a catboat that Sarg drew. This is a watercolor from 1929, I believe. And this was part of the Waterfront Carnival. But I just love it with the oversized figure of Austin Strong and the tiny little boat, and it just makes you smile. Next slide, please. Tony Sarg he was a showman. He was a trickster. He did lots of things. There was one time during Prohibition when he organized a ship from the Navy which approached the steamship and made the steamship stop. And the passengers on the boat all realized that they were being tallied here by the Coast Guard or the Navy. And since it was Prohibition, they all threw their cache of illegal spirits overboard, only to find that this was another trick from Tony Sarg. And his friends didn't particularly like it, but it was just another time of a story of Tony Sarg. The biggest hoax that Sarg did and was national news was when he created the illusion of a sea monster in the waters around Nantucket. For 3 weeks in the local paper, the Inquirer Mirror, there were stories planted about this sea monster. Mary, his daughter, and friends planted these footprints in the sand, measuring, they were like 6 foot by 12 foot. I mean, they were huge. And the local fishermen discovered it. They ran to the paper. Here are footprints. Well, developing the story over 3 weeks, each week in the paper was, we've seen another sighting of this sea monster. Well, it created such a sensation that Path News came to the island to film what this sea monster was about. For those of you who don't know what Path News was, before television, when you went to the movies, there was always a 5-minute newsreel by Path News that gave you the headlines of what was going on in the world. It was an interlude between usually 2 movies of each of about an hour. So this was built up and built up to what is this? May I see the next slide? Well, that's what it was. Tony Sarg created a sea monster, which was a huge balloon. And he took the head of that balloon, which I believe is in the next slide. No, let's go back. Just the head, he inflated on Kochu, which is a little part of the Nantucket Island, which borders the harbor, but on the other side of the channel. And he floated that over to Children's Beach. And on Children's Beach, we can now look at the next slide, where he blew up the rest of these things and created this monster. Look at the size. It was amazing. It was absolutely amazing. Of course, everyone on the island had to come down and see it. It drew lots of comments. They realized this was a toy, a balloon, but the sheer size of it is just monumental. And the next slide is a composite of the Inquirer and Mirror's 3 stories that they had on the Thursdays prior to this edition of Saturday on August 28th, 1937, where it talks about the sea monster, and this is again national news. Next picture, please. And here shows the delight of Tony Sarg with children immersed in the mouth of the serpent, everyone realizing what a wonderful, wonderful trick this was, event, and it would be wonderful today to recreate this. The Norman Rockwell Museum created a smaller version of this, which is on the front lawn of the museum in Stockbridge, and hopefully it too will come to Nantucket to be seen. I think there's one more slide.
Oh, I may have. Yeah, sorry. We were supposed to have the balloon in New York. I seem to have missed that one, but I can keep talking and I'll come up with it.
I thought there was one great big one.
Yeah, no, we're missing it out. Sorry. Hang on a
Okay.
second. I'll find it for us.
Well, there are many more pictures of the sea monster. And in 2018, PBS did a version of this on the American Experience, which is a wonderful film, which you can view if you look it up, and you can find it on the Google. And it was about a 4 or 5 minute film of the sea monster and the recreation of everything. The sea monster was in the following year reinvented and became a balloon on Broadway for the Thanksgiving Day parade, because Tony was the person who invented the balloons that we see every Thanksgiving in the Macy's Thanksgiving Day parade. And I believe later this afternoon, Melissa Sweet will be talking about her book that she wrote, and I helped with her, called Balloons Over Broadway, of the many balloons that he created and are still being created today. Tony Sarg ceases to amaze me. And behind me in my office, I have a few objects still on the wall that are still here in Key West. So much of it went to the exhibition and is on loan, or I have sold, because I started the Forager House collection in Nantucket, and in 1966, what year was it? 1970 something. I came across a cache of watercolors, and I put together an exhibition of his watercolors and other objects, and it was a sellout. I became hooked on Sarg and have consistently delved into who he was and collected things. And having an antique shop, I not only collected, I sold. And so in buying and selling, I came across many, many things. And I was amazed when I went through the exhibition at the Rockwell Museum of how many things that were in that exhibition that were no longer belonged to me, but at one time had belonged to me. They had passed through my hands. So I could go on and on and on. I've been fascinated by Tony Sarg for 50 years. I wrote a book about him some years ago about the collection. I participated with the Artists Association of Nantucket several years ago when we did a miniature version of Tony Sarg. And I am very happy to have donated so much material to the NHA. And I'm sure that I will be giving them more in the future. Thank you.
Thank you. That's great. Wonderful comments. You know, you are both so knowledgeable about Sarg, but I did want to ask, you know, of course, in the 20th century, there was much knowledge of Sarg on Nantucket and probably also, and obviously also in New York. And what we have found with the exhibition here is that many people who come, it's almost like either a discovery or a rediscovery of Sarg. You know, maybe people who had a little bit of awareness, you know, loved learning so much more about him. And I'm wondering on Nantucket, how you are feeling about that. I recall, you know, several years ago, Niles Parker, your director, was thinking about an exhibition when he was curator. And now to see this coming to the fore, what are you hoping to accomplish? And what do you notice about Sarg's presence on the island today? And I'll just mention, if anybody has questions, please go right ahead and put them in the Q&A and we'll bring them forward. But love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, no, I'll take the first stab at that. I mean, in part because of perhaps the circles that I'm in, where I know people like George and I know other collectors who've worked with George and we have our own collection. Sarg seems like a living presence on Nantucket. You know, you see his map, copies of it sold in shops. You see his souvenir boxes turn up. People have Sarg things in their homes. He seems like he's part of the story. And, you know, anytime you read about the 1920s or 30s, Tony Sarg is, you know, walking across the stage every time you least expect it. But that may just be that we're in this privileged position of having heard of him and working with his material. And so, you know, how many people on the street, you know, the name is familiar, but they're not quite sure. They could tell you why. They usually can say something about Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade. Maybe they call him Tony Sarg. You know, there's a little bit of like disjunction there. And when I was working on the catalog with you, Stephanie, and Lenore, you know, one of my colleagues here, you know, was like, don't tell me you're going to discover that Tony Sarg was actually a, you know, really horrible person. We don't want to know that, you know. And I was like, no, actually, it turns out he's totally fabulous. The more you research, the more you realize just how creative and interesting and a good person that he was. And we are actually taking the approach, you know, we are delighted to be bringing the exhibition here for next year. And we are starting to roll out some of our publicity and some of our, you know, in some of our publications. And we're starting with the approach of who was Tony Sarg. We want to make sure that people understand why we're doing this, why he was important, why he was linked to the island and to the US. And we're really sort of starting, you know, while we think a lot of people here have heard of him, we're not going to assume that, and we're going to tell you why. And so, in fact, one of my colleagues has written for the next issue of our magazine, Historic Nantucket, Who Was Tony Sarg introduction, and certainly our social media campaign is going to take that approach as well. But I'd love to hear George's thoughts on this, because George is really the one who's sort of kept Sarg in the Nantucket consciousness, through so much of his work.
Well, it was about 25 years ago, maybe longer, when Niles was curator at the museum, that we started to talk about a Sarg exhibition. Our lives sort of changed. I had a death and in my family that changed my life. Niles moved on to another position, and the project sort of got put on hold. And now here it is, after the germ that I had maybe 30 years ago, put together in an exhibition. And I am so thrilled with it. Not only have I seen so many things that I already knew, I found many things I did not know about. I learned a lot by reading the catalog, by reading the descriptions on the labels. And yes, Sarg is known by many people of my age and younger, somewhat younger, but the youth do not know who Tony Sarg was. And that's who I believe Michael and Niles want to involve and get him to be known as a household word, and why he was so important to the development of the life on Nantucket and the times and the art and so forth. And his name should be right up there with the Coffins and the Macy's and the Starbucks and all those other families that have been on Nantucket for generations. And although Sarg was only one generation, but he should be right up there with on that list of who made Nantucket. I mean, there's maybe 20 people should be on that list, but he should certainly be there.
Wonderful comments, and welcome to Niles, because we're thrilled to have you, and I know you've had a long time appreciation for the Sarg materials at the Nantucket Historical Association as curator and now director. So is there anything you might like to add, thinking as the exhibition is going to be coming across the water to you?
Thanks, Stephanie. Thanks for inviting me to join now as well. This has been great, really enjoying the symposium today. A real pleasure to be able to listen and learn. I've learned a lot this morning as well, as George mentioned. And I can't add much to what George and Michael have already said. Have done just a great job talking about Sarg. I was so happy upon coming back to hear about the Sarg exhibit that you and the Norman Rockwell Museum had undertaken, and the work that you had done to make that happen, and that it was already well on its way, and that it was coming to Nantucket. I couldn't quite believe it. And then when I saw George last year for the first time in many years, being able to talk with him about that and realizing that a long-standing dream was coming true really means a great deal. We are very, very excited to bring the show to Nantucket, as Michael indicated. Getting ready to have it here, to feature some of the materials from our collection, thinking about some of the programs that we want to run here. And I think George just said this, how do we feature it to a new generation? There are people in that photograph of the sea serpent coming on shore here who we can identify. And not surprised if there are a few people still alive here on the island that might remember it from being a very young child here on the island. I remember talking to Nancy Chase, who was a scrimshander who has since passed away, but she is one of the little girls that you can see in the photograph of it. And she used to speak about what a amazing time it was in her life, and remembering that and speaking so fondly about Tony Sarg. So there is that connection here that's very personal out here on the island, and we're looking forward to tapping that as much as we can, and very grateful to be part of this partnership with you.
Thank you. We've enjoyed so much partnering with you, and couldn't have done it without you, that's for sure.
Thank you.
Can I ask
Lenora,
a question
go
here? I think it's very interesting that we also visited Nantucket to a couple of occasions to see collections, and that were brought forward to us. And I'm interested in the fact that the art colony existed around the time of Tony Sarg, and is it still a viable art colony, or has the changes in things like real estate and property values and all has that changed an artist's ability to really become part of that community now?
It's still ongoing, but the tenor of it has changed for exactly those reasons. So in literally like 1920, a group of summer residents and artists came together to start providing opportunities for artists to come to Nantucket and paint. A very strong grounding in plein air painting. Frank Swift Chase started coming here to teach. A woman named Florence Lang, who was from New Jersey, but who summered here with her husband, she started buying pieces of real estate around the harbor, some of which, old fish shacks and things, which were converted to summer residences where artists could rent them for a period of time at relatively affordable, actually quite affordable rates, stay on the waterfront, and then they were encouraged to paint. And she bought a building and opened one of the earliest art galleries, if not the earliest art gallery that was here on island. Florence Lang also bought up a lot of real estate in order to keep harborfront commercial businesses in operation. So the idea was that the art colony would bring in summer dollars, but not displace the winter dollars and the working community that were here. It was meant to reinforce the local community. And Sarg arrives at exactly the time that is developing. The art colony here, it's very similar to the art colony in Provincetown, ones that are in New Hampshire. There's these little art colonies all over the place. It never has the prominence of Cape Ann, Gloucester. It's never on a sort of nationally significant level, but it is locally significant. Out of this, the Artists Association of Nantucket was founded. They still exist, are going strong, and they do summer art shows and have many, many members. But an artist, of modest means wanting to come to the island, rent a fish shack, and paint for the summer, that is now largely impossible, unless they already have a friend and have a place that they could stay otherwise, which does happen. But it is a very different place because of the way real estate has gone here. It's just simply too dear. But that sort of emergence of a first artistic, and there are artists who are coming here earlier. I should point out that Eastman Johnson lived here and summered here. William Trust Richards sort of discovered his sort of luminous, to mix metaphors, luminous voice. I know it's a terrible mixed metaphor. On a trip to Nantucket in the 1860s. There's artists here earlier, but the formation of an actual sort of colony, that is literally exactly when Tony Sarg arrives. And he is part of it. He's painting and sketching, and he's inspiring people and being inspired by them. So that's the echoes of that do survive here.
Thank you. That's very interesting to know.
You
We
also
have a question. I'm sorry, go ahead, Niles. Thank you.
I think it was George.
George.
You also have people who are creating another art form that we think of, which would be the Nantucket baskets, which the Nantucket Historical Association has a huge collection of those. This is a unique form that was imagined and designed unique to Nantucket. And there are still a strong group of people who are weaving today. And the part of the NHA, which is the Nantucket Lightship Basket Museum, encourages and has classes for youth to learn how to create baskets to carry on this tradition in the future. But the people that do make baskets are usually people who have other professions and then do the baskets in their spare time. There are only a couple people that I can think of that who have been able to create Nantucket baskets and make a living out of that particular art form.
Great, thank you. Niles, were you going to add anything?
No, Mike covered it well. I was just going to add that after this, I am heading over to the Artists Association for a meeting this afternoon. So it is still very much alive and going here.
That's good to know. So we do have a question from the audience, which is, do you feel that Sarg's whimsical maps were sort of the basis for, the many town maps that we tend to see that are illustrated and that, point out historical locations? Do you think that he was a basis for that?
I believe that he was definitely an influence in those kind of maps, but at the same time, these kind of maps were done on Cape Cod and other places with similar type of images. A large image of a map, and then around the periphery, small images of personalities, locations, and so forth. I don't think Sarg was completely responsible, but I certainly think he had a huge influence on these kind of maps.
Yeah,
Great.
I would agree with George on that. Certainly in the small sampling of Nantucket maps, Austin Strong drew his own illustrated map of Nantucket. Other people in the 1930s did that. Those seem to be inspired by Sarg's example, but Sarg's example is clearly inspired by other ones.
There was another one by Ruth Haviland Sutton, which was similar to that too.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah, they're part of a current. And I think anybody who sees who wants to draw their own is certainly going to take away lessons. But he's not cutting from whole cloth and doing it.
Great, thank you. Another question from the audience. There's interest in Mary Sarg, and wondering if you can say a little bit more about her, whether she was, how she was engaged with her father's work, and, maybe a little bit more background on perhaps the collections. It looks like we have a visitor who, or a participant who might like a little more background on that.
George, do you want to take that?
Well, Mary Sarg was an artist in her own right. She was known for drawing figures. When I say figures, I'm talking about portraits. And she continued to do those later in life when she lived in Sarasota, Florida. And that's what she is known for. However, she did some other work, of which there's a piece of in the exhibit that I was not aware of, which is a painting of Nantucket with buildings and so forth. One other thing I'd like to say is that Sarg's presence on Nantucket, there is a collector who has lent things to the exhibition, who has a complete room in his house, which is called his Sarg room. He has a bed with a bed covering, which was Sarg, a rug on the floor, and then the walls are just loaded with all kinds of things. I mean, this is just one person and one person's collection, but again, like myself and others, I mean, he's intrigued and has the means to collect whatever he wants and can find. And it's a wonderful, wonderful, imaginative room to be in.
Well, you're absolutely right. Lenore and I had the pleasure of visiting that wonderful room. I think we are allowed to say that Max and Pamela Berry have lent to the exhibition. And in fact, that painting that you were talking about, George, by Mary Sarg, came from their collection. So we are fortunate to have these things on view.
Yes, I was.
Yeah, thank you. Well, it has been wonderful speaking with you. And I guess I'm going to ask Michael, do you want to mention the dates of your upcoming exhibition so that maybe visitors can get out there to see you?
Yes, absolutely. We would love to have people come see the show. We are just, as I said before, super excited to be featuring Stephanie and Lenore's really fantastic scholarly work and their great work and their team and bringing so much of this great stuff together. We're going to be opening it Memorial Day weekend of 2024. The Friday of Memorial Day weekend is when the public will be coming in. We'll do our gala the day before, gala opening, that is. and then it will be open into November. So throughout the high summer season here on Nantucket is when we're featuring it. And we're going to have some additional things from Nantucket layered into the show. We're delighted to say, but it really, I mean, one comment I was sort of thinking of earlier when people were talking is that, you know, here on Nantucket, where people have heard of Sarg or know of Sarg, they tend to think of him in terms of Nantucket, in terms of the hospital fundraisers and parties, in terms of Sea Monster. And I think one of the great things that the Norman Rockwell Museum show has done is to expose his full career and the sort of all the different avenues that he went down. And many of those will be a surprise to people here on Nantucket who think they know him already. The book illustrations, the book design, the experiments with animation, sort of where the balloons are coming from, the Madame Alexander partnership. I mean, there's so many aspects. I'm not even scratching the surface. We're just super excited to bring that complete picture of him here and to show that to our audience and our visitors. And we want to say thank you for you guys doing all the heavy lifting to get it all in place. So thank you.
Oh, we
Thank you.
thank you so much. I mean, I think one of the most amazing days that we had, Lenore and I, was with you as we were opening some of these incredible treasures in your storage facility. And as you mentioned, those book illustrations, you know, seeing those originals for the first time, so carefully cared for by the NHA, and you know, they truly are treasures. So we've been very grateful to share them.
Thank you.
And I might add the wonderful marionette that we borrowed of Radamonte, which really ties together so much of puppetry history, New York history, and ultimately Nantucket's collections.
Yeah. Well, we thank you so much, all of you, and look forward to continuing our collaboration next summer. Thank you all for listening. We will be back at 12:45 with Catherine Slogic, and she'll be talking about The Martial Adventures of Henry and Me by Tony Sarg and William Allen White.